A young woman leans over her workbench in New Jersey, sometime around 1990. She dips a fine camel hair brush into a small pot of glowing paste, touches the bristles to her lips to bring them to a perfect point, and traces a delicate line across a watch dial. She does this hundreds of times a day. By the time she walks home that evening, her clothes, her skin, even her hair carry a faint green shimmer. Her coworkers joke that she looks like a ghost drifting through the dark streets. It looks enchanting. It looks like magic captured in a bottle. It is already, quietly, killing her. Here is the strange truth that history almost managed to erase. The very substance marketed as the miracle glow of the 20th century, the one that lit up watch faces, clock hands, and instrument panels in soft, luminous green, was dissolving the jawbones of the young women who painted it, from the inside out. And for years, nobody believed them. This is the hidden history of that glow, and the forgotten women who paid for it with their lives. So why would a company hand teenage girls a radioactive paintbrush and tell them to put it in their mouths? To understand that, we have to go back to the moment radium itself became a sensation, decades before anyone painted a single dial. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie isolated a strange new element from tons of pitchblende ore in a leaking, freezing shed in Paris. They named it radium, from the Latin word for ray, because it glowed faintly on its own and radiated an energy nobody could yet explain. Within a few short years, the public fell in love with it. Newspapers called it a wonder of the modern age. Companies rushed to bottle it. You could buy radium toothpaste, radium face cream, radium chocolate, even radium water, sold as a tonic that promised vitality and youth. Nobody understood the danger yet, because nobody could see it. That invisibility is the thread running through this entire story. In 1917, a scientist named Sabin von Soschocki perfected a paint he called undark, radium mixed with zinc sulfide, which absorbed the radium's energy and converted it into a steady, self-sustaining glow that needed no batteries and no charging. It was extraordinary, and it arrived at the perfect, terrible moment. The United States had just entered the First World War, and soldiers in the trenches needed watches and instrument dials they could read in pitch darkness. Suddenly, demand for luminous paint exploded. Factories opened in Orange, New Jersey, and later in Ottawa, Illinois, employing hundreds of young women, many of them teenagers, some barely out of school. The work paid well, almost 3 times the average factory wage, and it was considered clean, respectable, even glamorous. The women were nicknamed the Ghost Girls because the radium dust settled into their skin and hair, and they would glow softly as they walked home in the evening. Some of them, delighted by the effect, painted their nails with it for fun, or dabbed a little onto their teeth before a date so they would flash a glowing smile in the dark. The technique that made the work fast enough to be profitable was called lip dip paint. A fine brush loses its point quickly, and a blunt brush ruins the delicate numbers on a dial. So supervisors taught the women to shape the bristles between their lips before every stroke. Lip, dip in the radium paint, paint the number, lip again. Hundreds of times a shift, thousands of times a week, each pass depositing a microscopic trace of radium directly onto their tongues and into their bodies. Meanwhile, in the very same buildings, the company's chemists handled radium with lead screens, forceps, and protective aprons, treating it as something dangerous enough to fear. The women painting the dials were never told any of that. When some of them worried aloud, they were reassured that radium was harmless, even healthy, that a little glow never hurt anyone. For a while, nothing seemed wrong. Radium's damage does not announce itself quickly, it hides. And that delay is exactly what let this disaster spread as far as it did. Then, one by one, the women began to fall apart. It started with the teeth. A dial painter would visit the dentist with a small ache, have a tooth pulled, and the socket simply would not heal. Instead, the infection spread into the jawbone itself, which grew soft, then began to crumble and die from within, a condition doctors eventually named radium jaw. Some women lost their entire lower jaw. Others developed crippling anemia, spontaneous bone fractures, tumors that seemed to bloom out of nowhere. Doctors, baffled and unfamiliar with radioactive poisoning, misdiagnosed them constantly, sometimes even suggesting the women were suffering from syphilis, a cruel and false accusation that only added shame to their suffering. The companies denied everything. They commissioned their own studies, buried unfavorable results, and told the public and the courts that the women's illnesses had nothing to do with the workplace. For years, it worked. Grace Fryer, one of the original dial painters, spent 2 full years searching for a single lawyer willing to take on a case against a powerful corporation. Eventually, she found one, and in 1927, Grace and 4 other dying women filed suit against United States Radium. The press called them the Radium Girls, and their case became a sensation, not because people were outraged fast enough, but because the women were so visibly, undeniably dying in the courtroom itself, some too weak to raise their arms to take the oath. The scientific breakthrough that finally proved what had happened to them came from a pathologist named Harrison Martland. He discovered that radium behaves in the body almost exactly like calcium. The body cannot tell the difference.
So it gets absorbed straight into bone, where it lodges permanently and sits there for decades, releasing radiation continuously from the inside, like a tiny lamp buried inside the skeleton that never turns off. Martland even devised tests to measure radioactivity in the women's exhaled breath, proving conclusively that the source of their illness was inside their own bodies, planted there, one brush stroke at a time. In 1928, the case settled, and it became one of the earliest and most important legal precedents establishing that companies could be held responsible for occupational disease, not just workplace accidents. It reshaped labor law and helped pave the way toward the safety standards that, decades later, became the foundation of modern occupational health regulation in America. Now, here is the part that finally explains the glow itself and why it was so uniquely dangerous. Radium doesn't just sit quietly. It decays, releasing alpha particles, a type of radiation that is almost harmless from the outside, easily stopped by a sheet of paper or even the outer layer of your skin. That is precisely why the women who merely touched the paint or admired its glow from across a room seemed fine. But swallow it, and everything changes. Once alpha radiation is inside the body, next to living bone marrow and soft tissue, it becomes devastating, tearing through cells at close range with nowhere to escape. And because radium mimics calcium, the body doesn't excrete it. It builds it into the skeleton itself, permanently, with a half-life of over 1,600 years. In a very real sense, those women's bones are still, quietly, radioactive today. The tragedy of the Radium Girls didn't just end one company's paint line. It fundamentally changed how the world measured and regulated radiation exposure.
The dose limit scientists later used during the Manhattan Project, the safety thresholds that still guide nuclear medicine and radiation work today, were built in part on the grim, hard-won data extracted from those women's ruined bodies. Radium paint itself was eventually phased out, replaced first by tritium, a far weaker radioactive substitute, sealed safely inside glass, and eventually by materials like strontium aluminate, which glow by simply absorbing and slowly releasing ordinary light. No radioactivity required at all. The watch on your wrist tonight, if it glows, almost certainly owes nothing to radium. But some of those original dials still exist, in drawers, in museum cases, in old family watches passed down without anyone realizing what they're holding. Decades later, a Geiger counter held near one of them will still click. Somewhere, in a box in someone's attic, a small, soft green light is quietly still glowing, exactly the way it did in 1922, patiently outliving every single woman who ever touched it.